glad someone's looking forward to the sermon. Today is the Feast of All Saints, as we've heard, the day to remember and celebrate what the Church calls the communion of saints. Some of them famous, most of them not so much. Human beings to look out for, to look up to be inspired by. Stories of human lives that have been lived close to the truth and shot through with love, service, sacrifice, and praise. We gather not just in a church building, those of us who are here physically, but in an area that carries the name of a saint. This whole area of London is called St. James's. And this month, I've spent time in some of the English villages named after other saints. Just two examples were a village named after St. Peter in Buckinghamshire and a village named after St. Osyth in Essex. Northwest of London and east of London, both villages in ancient landscapes with amazingly rich histories of agriculture, rituals that belong to the land, battles against the enemies, whether that was from the next village or from across the sea. The names and stories of the saints are baked into the landscape of this land. St. Peter, the fisherman from the Gospels, and St. Osyth, a woman from the 8th century who refused to give up her Christian faith and was murdered by Danish invaders. But it was very striking that in both of these villages, and has been reported since August in areas of London and Birmingham, still flags of St. George, the red cross on the white background, and also Union Jacks were flying from lampposts, many lampposts, and painted on pedestrian crossings and mini roundabouts. As one of those villages is the village that I grew up in, I want to say clearly, not in my name. It's important to say once again, and to say every time the simplistic narrative of English St. George is repeated, George himself is first mentioned as a Christian martyr who died in the year 303 as an officer in the Roman army in Palestine, having stood up to the emperor who was intent on murdering and persecuting Christians. George had converted to Christianity himself. Born in Cappadocia, now eastern Turkey, George was probably of Iranian origin. He never visited England, is the patron saint not only of England, but of Portugal and Greece and Ethiopia. As an early figure in Christian communities and undoubtedly a courageous person, standing up to dictatorship and abuse of power, he could be, and this is perhaps one of the tragedies of St. George in our current generation, he could be a unifying figure, international, venerated as he is by the Roman Catholic Church and by the Russian Orthodox and Greek Orthodox churches, as well as our own Anglican Communion. This story of George standing up for persecuted minorities against a power-hungry and violent absolute ruler is one that is in itself inspiring. Insofar as George's association with England is concerned, this nation was a little bit late adopting him as our patron saint. From the 9th until the 15th century, the patron saint of England, again important to repeat this, whose borders were not yet settled, was Edmund the Martyr, who's buried just down the road at Westminster Abbey. George was adopted in the 15th century, over a millennium after his death, and after his story had become powerful in Europe and the Middle East. In August of this year, an online campaign began called Operation Raise the Colours, supported by some far-right groups such as Britain First and the Unite the Kingdom rally in September in London, not far from here. Perhaps a little merged with the flying of the St. George flag after the victory of the Lionesses in the European Football Championships over the summer, this Operation Raise the Colours led to the painting and flying of St. George's Cross in villages like St. Peter and St. Osyth and many others. In September, together with representatives and leaders from every Christian denomination in the UK, I signed a letter published in the national press that read thus: "We are deeply concerned about the co-opting of Christian symbols, particularly the cross, during the Unite the Kingdom rally. Many individuals and communities felt anxious, unsettled, and threatened by aspects of the march. There were undoubtedly diverse motivations for those engaged in the event. We respect the right to free speech, to hold different views on issues such as immigration, the importance of healthy debate between religious communities, and the need to disagree well when consensus is difficult. We also understand that for many of those involved in the rally, there is a deep sense of frustration at feeling unheard and forgotten in the democratic process. We know that we cannot heal this wound unless the Church and society as a whole rises to do more to address the issues of poverty, inequality, and exclusion. However, this rally included racist, anti-Muslim, and far-right elements. As Christians from different theological and political backgrounds, we stand together against the misuse of Christianity. The cross is the ultimate sign of sacrifice for the other. Jesus calls us both to love our enemies, love our neighbors and our enemies, and to welcome the stranger. Any co-opting or corrupting of the Christian faith to exclude others is unacceptable. The development of a Christian nationalist narrative in the current administration of the United States, with the establishment this February of the White House Faith Office, seeking to align America First principles with a particular version of Christian morality, is having an influence on the UK's national conversation. This is happening especially within the UK's Conservative Party and Reform, but also among some Labour Party members too. The co-opting and corrupting of Christian symbols in the Unite the Kingdom rally is a more extreme example of this, but finds roots in mainstream political discourse, which is why the Church itself must speak up and be part of the debate. And this day, the Feast of All Saints, is exactly the day to do this. The saints are the most inspiring and energizing communion to be part of. They are holy, and you and I are called to be holy as part of this communion today. And to excavate more Old English custom and practice, the word holy comes from an Old English word, heilig, meaning not pure or good or perfect. Heilig means whole. You and I are whole beings. Holistic, unified, integrated selves is our God-given human identity. You and I join the communion of saints today. Over centuries, in an incredibly diverse set of circumstances, they have been people who have moved to the edge of things, looked over even into the abyss, and said no. We choose love and sacrifice. We choose hope and unity. We choose to remain free from stereotypes and expectations, resolutely independent-minded in the manner of Jesus, who told stories and asked questions and controversially said, in answer to questions about neighbors and enemies, that everyone was my neighbor and that I am asked to love my enemies in the gospel today. Into this November grey day bursts a riot of color and noise, chatter and robes, bravery beyond belief, courage beyond measure, the communion of saints, the stories of human lives lived to the full, the awkward squad, the outspoken ones, the colossally unwise if you want to stay alive crowd. They burst onto the scene today with their stories of battles fought and won, justice called for, conversion of heart and mind that sometimes baffled even them at the time and propelled them into an unknown future. Following Christ. Banish from your minds any thought of carefully crafted stained glass with saints captured and ossified, pious and still. Even the contemplatives, even the Trappists, even the isolated scholars knew what it was to be fully alive, somehow to want to go to the heart of things, not waste their time in displacement activity, but keep returning to the deepest meaning of living and the hardest truth of dying. It's sometimes said that a saint isn't someone really pious whose life makes you think, well, that looks a bit like hard work, that looks a bit heavy. Saints are human beings who live their lives in such a way that you think, I'll have what she's having. Saints are somehow especially alive. Many have suffered terribly, and many die for what they believe in. But the Christian tradition will always insist that life in abundance is our calling, life together. The saints are the ones who said yes. Saints are companions who reassure us that the path you and I tread, however challenging or alarming, is one that is well trodden before us. In this vast and unknowable universe, we are never alone. Sometimes courageous or foolhardy, saints are human beings who somehow have an irreducible desire to travel towards the center of things, close to the dwelling place of God. Like a journey to the center of the earth, saints will come close to the heat and the dust of living at the core. It's costly. I don't know about you, but I need the energy of the saints today. I need their example, their persistence, their love. I need their gold leaf and singing and playful defiance in the face of narratives that seek to divide. Because somehow in this sacrament, I know their presence. It's not an intellectual knowing. It's not a thought-out theological argument for a category of humanity called saint that's a sort of upper-class Christian. It's not a pre-Reformation mawkish obsession with saints or a post-Reformation squeamishness about saints. It's a different kind of knowledge, a different kind of knowing. It's a felt knowledge that breaks my heart and breaks it open and leaves me in communion with the saints, both undefended and undefeated. Undefended and undefeated. Much of what we know about life and living, about death and dying, is not stuff we understand intellectually. We often live by felt knowledge as disciples of Christ. And it's this kind of knowing that roots me in the fusion of eternity and time that I know is here at this sacrament and in this community, in person and online. This is a liminal, sacred space. For us physically, boundaried by prayer-soaked walls and full of air, thick with music and the smell of wine at the banquet of the kingdom rehearsed here every Sunday, every time. Saints are, you and I are, called to be holy, whole. And it's precisely in the ordinariness of holiness and in the ordinary holiness of saints that their beauty and example are to be found. We must stand up to the narrative of saints that seeks to dissemble and divide. We come to this altar not to make some kind of intellectual assent as to the existence of saints, but to do some deep and felt theology together, rooted in the body and blood of Christ that is mysteriously present here in the same way as it was for them. Drink from the same cup as Kwabena Otobakuguano, William Wilberforce, Isaac Newton, Mary Beale, and much more importantly, the thousands of housekeepers, nurses, workhouse residents, retailers, the ones who made their way through their own complex societies and prayed here. To celebrate All Saints this year is to determinedly throw a party in a divided and anxious society. But it's not a frivolous party. It has the meaning and depth of a Last Supper or a wake. This Eucharist is a broken-hearted celebration of everything that binds us when the cost is high and the rewards seem out of reach. Love your enemies. Pray for those who hate you. It's time for the old English principle of heilighness, holiness, a holistic view of humanity that sees us united as whole beings with nature and the rest of humanity. And the spirit of St. George, who courageously stood up for persecuted minorities in an empire that was intent on overwhelming and destroying them. George was a servant of the state, serving in the army, but in this case broke ranks because his conscience, rooted in Christ, led him to see that persecution and violence against minorities by the empire was wrong. It was a principle for which he would be prepared to give his life, and we give thanks for all the saints and him today. Amen.